Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to Chapter 20. We're talking about tissues. Previous video, we just finished up talking about connective tissue. Now we're going to move on to talk about muscle. Remember, there's 4 tissue types that animals have, 4 main tissue types. Epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. Epithelial is all about, it's an interface tissue. It's where the body comes in contact with the world, so it's kind of a defender. Connective tissue is all about tying the body together and supporting the body. Your skeleton holds you up, your tendons tie your muscles to your bones, your ligaments tie your bones to bones. Your fat supports you in being a cushion, and it supports you in lean times. We burn up our fat when we don't have enough to eat, though I haven't had that problem in a very long time. Blood supports the body by transporting nutrients around the body. Support. Next, we're going to move on and talk about muscle. Muscle's job is to move stuff. We have 3 different kinds of muscle tissues that move 3 different things. Our first is skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is what moves you. When you think of muscle, you are thinking of skeletal muscle, because when you think of muscle, you think of like your biceps, your triceps, and your quads, and your lats, and your glutes. All right? Those muscles are what move you. When you eat steak, when you eat hamburger, when you eat chicken, you're eating skeletal muscle of a cow or a chicken or a pig. Those are the skeletal muscles that we're eating. Our next variety is cardiac muscle, and as the name cardiac implies, this is heart. And where do we find cardiac muscle? You only find it in the heart. All right? Heart muscle is involuntary, which means you don't choose when it works. Isn't that a good thing? Aren't you glad that you don't have to decide when your heart beats? It's like, hey, I got a question. All right, wait. Go ahead. All right, wait. All right, hurry. Wait. If you had to decide when to make your heart beat, wouldn't that get really frustrating really quick? The heart is involuntary. Skeletal muscle, the one we talked about just a minute ago, is voluntary, which means you decide when it works. You volunteer to use it. Okay? Skeletal muscle is voluntary. Cardiac muscle is involuntary. Our last variety of muscle tissue is called smooth muscle. Your skeletal muscles are, attached to your skeleton. Your cardiac muscle is, your heart. Your smooth muscle is your gut muscle. And when I say gut muscle, I mean the muscle associated with your esophagus for moving the food down to your stomach. The muscle associated with your stomach for digesting your food. The muscle associated with your intestines for moving food through your body. The muscle associated with your rectum for expelling food waste now from your body. Smooth muscle is also involuntary. Think about that. You also don't have to decide to move food through your body. And I think we've all probably experienced times where we had proof that smooth muscle was involuntary because we had some very severe urges that we needed to use the restroom really quickly and had no choice about doing so. Smooth muscle, involuntary. Here we see microscopic views of the 3 different tissue types. This is skeletal muscle right here. One thing that I want to point out is that skeletal muscle is striated. I'm not sure if you can see on the video, but in the PowerPoint, you can see that skeletal muscle is striated, which means it has stripes. The second thing about skeletal muscle is that it's got many nuclei per cell. It's called being multinucleate. So, voluntary muscle, skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is voluntary, it's multinucleate, and it has stripes. It's striated. Cardiac muscle, and skeletal muscle, is the muscles of your skeleton. Cardiac muscle, the only thing it has in common with skeletal muscle is that it also has stripes. And I'm sure that you can't see it in this video. You need to look at it on the PowerPoint itself, and you can see that there are very subtle little stripes that go along with this cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle is striped like skeletal muscle, but it is involuntary, which means it operates when it wants to, and it is uninucleate, which means each muscle cell has a single nuclei. Our last variety is smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is the muscle of your guts. Smooth muscle is basically the complete opposite of skeletal. It is involuntary, it is uninucleate, and it is not striated. That's why it's called smooth, is because it doesn't have the stripes on it that the other two muscle types do. Skeletal muscle is for moving you through the environment. Cardiac muscle is for moving blood throughout your body. And smooth muscle is for moving food and what becomes food waste through and out of your body. Our last tissue type is nervous. Our last tissue type is nervous. Nervous tissue is all about communication and control. When we talk about nervous tissue, we need to talk about the neuron. The neuron is the cell that does all of the communicating, that does all of the controlling. The brain is the highest concentration of neurons in your body. It is the organ responsible for controlling the whole rest of the body. Really? Your body is just a puppet. Your brain is the puppeteer. Your nerves are the strings. Your nerves, your spinal cord and the nerves that go out to your body, that's also neurons. That's also nervous tissue. When you say brain, when you say spinal cord, when you say nerves, you're saying nervous tissue. The cell that does that job of communicating, of controlling, is the neuron. When you say nerve cell, you're saying neuron. The job is to sense stimuli, seeing light, hearing commotion, feeling heat, feeling cold, feeling like I have to use the bathroom, feeling like I'm hungry, sensing stimuli. All of that is nervous tissue. All of that is nervous tissue. Again, as I said before, the neuron is the cell that does the controlling. This is actually a shot of a neuron right here. Neurons, they sort of kind of look like weird tennis rackets. They have a handle, and they've got all these extensions that come off of them. This is not a mess. This is what neurons are built like. This is one neuron. Here's another piece of a neuron. Here are other sections of neurons up here. This is one neuron in the center. Interesting to note, this particular picture is a neuron on a printed circuit board. This is a neuron on, it is the thing that does communicating and controlling in your body on the thing that does communicating and controlling in a computer. You are really, really just a very complicated computer. Way smarter than the computer in your phone. I know sometimes we sure don't feel like we're as smart as our computer. Our brain is so much more complicated than computers. Computers don't hold a candle to how complicated our brain is. The way that life is organized. Cells are the smallest things that can be considered alive. I put cells together to make tissues. Those cells do the same job, that's why it's the same kind of tissue. I put tissues together and I get organs. Those organs are tissues working together to accomplish a goal. What is the goal of the heart? The goal of the heart is to pump blood around the body. And we already said it's all four tissues. What is the goal of the stomach? The goal of the stomach is to digest food. It's all made of all four tissues. It's got mostly muscle. It is wrapped in epithelial tissue and lined in epithelial tissue. Anytime you have muscle, you always have connective tissue associated with it to tie it together to keep the muscle cells from pulling themselves apart. And then if you're ever full or sick to your stomach or hungry, you know there has to be nerves. There has to be connection between the stomach and the brain so that you can feel these things. All right? Organs are made of tissues. The small intestine works with the stomach to digest food. As we said, it's lined in epithelium. It has walls of connective tissue that also have blood vessels associated with it. And it's got 2 layers of smooth muscle tissue to move food around. And it has to have nerves attached to it to make it move. This is a section of intestine that has been cross-sectioned so we can see all of these different pieces, all of these different tissues. These little fingers that we see right here, they're all lined in epithelial tissue. They have blood vessels running in them. Blood vessels themselves are tiny organs, and they've got nerves and epithelial epithelial tissue and muscle tissue and connective tissue. The underlying layer of all of this epithelial tissue is always going to be connective tissue. On the back side of this connective tissue layer is muscle. Then there's more connective tissue. Anywhere you have muscle, you always have connective tissue associated with it to keep it from ripping itself apart. And then to tie the whole thing together, basically kind of like a wrapper on a hamburger, is epithelial tissue. Tying the whole thing together. And it's not specifically shown here, but you've got nerves. Nerves that are associated with it. Anytime you have muscle, you've always got nerves associated with it to tell the muscle when to move. Most normal organs, most of your organs are made of all four tissues.